Hello and welcome to the UK Gaming Network podcast. I'm Zoidberg, and this week I want to ask you a question. What do you think of when I say the words Need for Speed? Is it sleek glossy sports cars tearing along city streets and country roads? Or is it street racing, glowing undercar neon and a boot full of nitrous? Or maybe it's police chases and the thrill of evading a spike trap? In truth, there is no right way to answer, as all of those things and more have appeared in EA's long-running series. This is a series that has constantly reinvented itself over the 23 games and 25 years since the first game. And last week, EA added another to the list, Need for Speed Heat, due on November the 8th. Following the first trailer, we got our first glimpse of some gameplay during the opening night of Gamescom, and we're still not really convinced, but the checkered history of the series means that we have every right to be. It began in 1994 with The Need for Speed on 3DO. Sponsored by Road and Track magazine, this had a lot in common with Accolade's Test Drive series, offering a selection of the world's most exotic sports cars to drive and handling that fell somewhere between arcade and simulation. It was an instant smash hit, and PlayStation and Saturn versions followed. Since then, the series has gone on to embrace street racing culture with the Need for Speed Underground, track racing with Need for Speed Shift, which I still consider to be the best racing simulator on the Xbox 360, and even a narrative-driven experience with Need for Speed The Run, which may have its critics but still featured a storyline better than the one used in the actual film. One foot has always been kept in the real world thanks to the officially licensed cars and soundtracks, but it hasn't always been plain sailing. It's a series that has as many highs as it does lows. For every great game in the series there are a couple of forgettable ones, and even a few outright stinkers. This is why we are cautiously optimistic about the new one. Obviously, being a massive racing game fan myself, I'll definitely be playing it when it launches. I've just been burnt too many times by the franchise to get carried away. Here's our list of the 5 worst entries in the Need for Speed series. Number 5. Need for Speed Undercover. By 2008, franchise fatigue had well and truly set in, and the release of Undercover didn't do anything to stop it. The overall presentation just felt lazy, with one of the dullest open worlds to explore, extremely bland visuals and a completely pointless RPG-style levelling system. The story placed you in the role of an undercover cop, infiltrating the street racing scene, but the cutscenes merely served as an excuse to link one race to the next, with almost nothing to get the player involved in the story. Perhaps the biggest criticism I can level at the game is that it's so bland that I forget it exists at times. Number 4. Need for Speed 2. EA almost killed the franchise completely with their first sequel by ignoring everything that made the first game great and doubling down on everything that didn't. Instead of thrilling point-to-point races along coastlines and mountain roads, we instead got a series of uninspired characterless circuits. The graphics were not great either, with basic car models and an almost non-existent sense of speed. Loading this up for the first time was one of the most disappointing experiences of my gaming life, and clearly the developers knew that they had made a mistake. The next game in the series added police chases to thrilling effect, and the rest is history. Number 3. Need for Speed Pro Street. In 2007, EA Black Box decided that it was time to take the series in a new direction, after the Underground and Most Wanted games had produced countless copycats such as Midnight Club and Juiced. Unfortunately, where they decided to take it was Pro Street. Gone was the open world, and in its place was the idea of organised street racing on ready-made tracks, rather than dangerous traffic-filled streets. This in itself was not a terrible idea if the game had been fun to play, but a combination of bad handling, terrible frame rate and boring tracks sucked all the fun out of it. It was also a game that featured a large online focus with the ability to create race days to share with your friends, but since the servers got switched off years ago, it now feels like half the game is missing. Number 2. Need for Speed Nitro. Racing games in general never fared particularly well on the Wii, thanks to the mistaken belief that they all need to feature motion controls and be aimed at kids. Need for Speed Nitro had a cartoon-style look with exaggerated car models, colourful environments and characters, but it suffered from a severe lack of content, bad drift mechanics and an overall lack of difficulty. It's a pure arcade game and it at least does offer support for the classic controller, but any enjoyment that you may have had in the first few races quickly disappears. The fact that it lacks any pretense of realism is what just saves it from our number 1 spot, as at least you knew what you were getting. Number 1. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. If you ever wondered why Switch owners have to put up with inferior versions of EA products, look no further than Hot Pursuit on the Wii. EA have always said that poor sales of their games on Nintendo consoles are to blame for their lack of support, but if they're making games of this quality, is it any wonder that they don't sell? Criterion's sterling efforts on the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions are completely ignored in this shoddy wannabe arcade racer, with graphics that would have looked bad on a PS2, and exceptionally poor track design. Even worse, the box showed screenshots from the Xbox version. If you were tricked into buying this when it was released, you have our deepest sympathies. Now it's time to round up what's been happening this week with the news. Monday night saw the Game Awards' Jeff Keighley kick off this year's Gamescom with a show of game footage, trailers, announcements and cringe-making stage interviews. There were games we'd seen before, like Gears 5 and Borderlands 3, but it was new stuff that we wanted, and there was plenty of that too. There were sequels to Kerbal Space Program and Little Nightmares, and we got our first look at Disintegration, the new game from the co-creator of Halo, all of which looked exactly as you'd expect. It was the extended look at Death Stranding, teased throughout the presentation, that sent the internet into meltdown, however. We were introduced to new characters, learnt a bit more about the story, and were then shown some gameplay. It all looked predictably spectacular, but we're still in the dark about how the combat works or plays. It could be the greatest game ever, or it could be a complete mess. We'll find out in November. WayForward Technologies are a developer who seem to be great at everything that they do, even games based on mummy movies starring Tom Cruise. And their Shantae series of platform games have been around since 2002, being quietly excellent. If you've never played one of the previous games, then the fourth entry is currently available on Xbox Game Pass. A brand new fifth game was teased earlier this year, and now has an official title. Shantae and the Seven Sirens is still scheduled for release this year, and will continue the story of the half-genie and her friends as they battle through another Metroidvania-style world of traps and puzzles. There's already a great intro animation that can be watched online, produced by Studio Trigger, which serves only to make us even more excited to play the full game when it arrives, on Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, PC and Apple Arcade in just a few months' time. During Nintendo's Indie Gamescom presentation, there was the usual selection of surprise releases and announcements, but none more interesting than the fact that Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition will be coming to the Switch on September the 27th. This will be the third game from Xbox Game Studios to release on the Nintendo Store, following Cuphead and Super Lucky's Tale, and it's one that should be a perfect fit for handheld play. Moon Studios' atmospheric platformer is one of the best looking and enjoyable in recent years. It's also rock hard, and will provide a stern challenge for even the most experienced gamer. The Switch release will be the updated version of the game, that featured more sections of the map and a difficulty selector, including the ultra-hardcore One Life mode for the ultimate challenge. Moving on to the week's new games now, with our reviews. If your main complaint about modern first-person shooters is that they don't make them like they used to, then Ion Fury is definitely the game for you. This is a brilliant throwback to the early days of the genre, and it even uses the same graphics engine that powered the original Duke Nukem 3D. Voidpoint and 3D Realms have made sure that it doesn't let troublesome things like a story get in the way of the action, as you run around shooting bad guys and looking for where to go next. The levels are all intricately designed so that exploration isn't just possible, it's actively encouraged so that you can find extra weapons and those all-important health and ammo pickups. It's packed with pop culture references, moves at a breakneck speed, and feels incredibly satisfying to play. It's easily one of the most enjoyable games we've played this year. Remnant from the Ashes is the latest release from Gunfire Games, who found success late last year with Darksiders 3. Like that game, there's more than a whiff of Dark Souls about how this one's structured, but by arming the player with guns, the gameplay is actually quite different. Projectile weaponry means that you can keep enemies at a distance, but the game compensates for this by simply throwing more of them at you at once. Learning the ways each creature attacks is vital to your survival, although the inclusion of co-op does make it easier to take down some of the bigger threats. Unfortunately, playing solo leaves you at a disadvantage in a few areas, the main one being that death is instant on your own, throwing you all the way back to the last checkpoint, whereas there's a chance that you can be revived as part of a team. It's also substantially more challenging to win a boss battle on your own, which can get very frustrating. RAD is Double Fine's entry into the ever-growing roguelike market, and it features a strong 80s style with day-glow colours and a synth-heavy soundtrack to grab our attention. Sadly, that's about all it has. Your first few games are reasonably fun as you explore the randomly generated wasteland, but it never adequately explains what you need to do to improve your chances of survival. feeling of progression, no matter how well you do on a single run, is vital for any roguelike, and that's sorely missing here. You have to enjoy the repetition of the early stages to get to the better stuff later on, but it's not fun to feel like the game is forcing you to grind. It's a shame because the production values are high, and the character mutations do their best to keep things interesting, but you'll still feel woefully underpowered too often, and more inclined to switch off rather than keep playing. Vigor is a hybrid of Battle Royale and survival game, and has been lingering around in Xbox Game Preview for about a year now. It's finally released full release status and it's well worth a look. It's made by Bohemia Interactive, who are more well known for their serious, realistic shooters like Operation Flashpoint and Armour, and although Vigor looks and plays like a third-person shooter, killing other players is not your primary objective. Up to 12 players are dropped into a map, with the mission to scavenge as much as they can from the environment before they leave. With plenty of exits open at all times, it's all about how much you're willing to risk. An airdrop will come at some point that offers greater rewards to whoever collects it, but how many other players will have the same idea? Each encounter is remarkably tense, and because the game is free to play, getting into a game isn't that difficult at the moment. How long a lifespan the game will have is anyone's guess, but there's bags of potential here if the player numbers remain high.
Welcome to the family. Get ready.
Choosing our retro game of the week was made a lot easier this week by the decision to release a stone cold classic onto the Sega Ages range for Nintendo Switch. Space Harrier is one of the most iconic arcade cabinets of the 1980s, and also one of the most recognisable games in Sega's back catalogue. Characters and music from the game have gone on to appear in everything from Sega Superstars Tennis to Bayonetta. It's just as fast and addictive today as it was when it first appeared too. It utilised the same sprite scaling technology that powered the likes of Outrun and Super Hang-On, propelling the player along level after level of enemies and obstacles. At times, the only way to survive is to ensure that you keep moving. The enemies themselves are ranged from one-eyed mammoths to stone heads, but it was the level-ending dragons that made our jaws drop the most. The Sega Ages version is a flawless port of the arcade original, and it adds a couple of new options including an auto-fire, online leaderboards and the ability to watch back replays of your attempts. It will be the best £6 you spend this week, whether you're new to it or an arcade veteran. That brings this week's show to an end. We hope you enjoyed it. If you liked, agreed or disagreed with anything that we've said, drop us a comment and tell us. The UKGN podcast is available every Friday at 7 PM. Give us a like and subscribe to make sure that you don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at UK Gaming Network. Until next week, thanks for watching.